awake. Hello again. It's me, Dr. Cyneric. Don't mind me and being in my bird form, of course. Main thing is, though, I'm still here to take care of you. See, I sometimes get turned into a bird anytime I use my, I probably shouldn't explain the details of my certain means of shortcuts in order to get to you and take you to faraway places, albeit briefly, of course, for your checkups. But anyway, like I say, I best not go into any more detail about that. How are you feeling? Lovely to hear. Very lovely to hear indeed. Well, I brought you here because I thought what I could do is, perhaps treat you to some education. I wanted to give you a bit of a history lesson. Maybe that might help you feel better and feel at ease and whatnot. How does that sound? Lovely, lovely indeed. Alright, well, let me just make a mental note about how's your headspace at the moment. From a scale of 1 to 10, of course. 10 being wonderful and brilliant, with 1 being not so well, feeling rather blue. So how are you feeling? Really? Well, thank you for letting me know. Let's see if some of this information might make you feel better. Okay then, okay. Well, I was just reading this lovely little book here that I was just propping up right against your lap while you were sleeping. Hope you don't mind, of course. And I was learning more about ancient history to do with medicine and doctors and healers and shamans and stuff like that. Would you like to know more about these things? Now, some of them might be a little bit disgusting, I will admit. Some of it might be a bit gross, but it's still ancient history, of course, and history is fascinating, if a bit weird at times. But anyway, are you ready? Wonderful, wonderful. All right then, let's get started. So, for starters, did you know that in the 1800s, that ketchup was sold as a medicine? It's true. Ketchup, tomato sauce, as medicine. In fact, here's a funny thing. It was so popular that snake oil salesmen started making their own without even including tomatoes in it. Very crazy indeed. There was a certain chappie, I think he was a doctor, I can't remember his name, and he sold tomato pills and then eventually a tomato sauce. And he said that ketchup would cure things like rheumatism and diarrhea. Yeah, unpleasant to talk about those things, but he wasn't too far off because, of course, tomatoes are very healthy, good for eyesight, for example, but certainly can't do anything like cure a broken bone. That's something that he actually thought it could cure. Tomato sauce and broken bones? You can't put those in the same sentence. Very crazy indeed. But that's not the weirdest thing. There's some other weird stuff as well. For example, the Victorians also believed that giving people medicine with tapeworm eggs inside actually contributed to weight loss, that the tapeworm would help a person lose weight. That is disgusting. Obviously, the tapeworm would be eating up all the nutrients and that person would get very ill and probably die. They even thought the cure for a tapeworm would be to put a spring coil down the throat, and that the coil would have a piece of food at the end, and then that worm would grab onto it and you'd pull it right out. But of course that didn't work either, because that often resulted in, well, dying. Of course, people choking to death on the coil. Very gruesome. Okay, now for a weird one. Here's a particularly weird one. The ancient Celts, you know, the enemies of the Romans, they thought that there was a cure for wounds. Let's say you bumped your knee, had a slight cut on your leg, You know what they did? They asked dogs to lick their wounds because they thought dogs had healing properties with their licks. Now, we all know that doggos are having healing properties for our mental health, of course. But, of course, no, they have filthy tongues, so licking a wound was very bad. They also thought that climbing under a horse would be enough to cure a whooping cough. They were very superstitious back in those days, and horses were considered to be, well, very significant in a spiritual sense. So climbing under a horse in all that grass and mud was supposedly there to help cure those common ailments. Peculiar, isn't it? Here's some more weird ones from the late 19th century. Let's say that you needed a blood transfusion. What do you think could be a fitting substitute, like, let's say, well, certainly not tomato ketchup, but obviously a blood transfusion would require blood from someone who needed to give some blood away and needed to have the same blood type. But they thought, you know what we'll do? We'll inject milk into people's veins. Well, maybe not inject so per se, but they did actually try to put milk in persons' veins, but considering how people didn't live long most of the time, I mean, some people were recorded to have lived for about 11 more days before dying. That didn't really last very long, that idea. There was an idea that did last long, though, very long time. The Chinese, in ancient times, they believed that snake oil made from snakes, that's right, had medicinal properties, that rubbing this snaky sort of liquid would help, well, alleviate wounds and achy joints and bodies. Like, workers often rubbed it into their arms and legs because they thought this would help all the aches and the hurting bits and stuff like that go away. Of course, that's where the term snake oil salesman comes from. It's, of course, a person who sells medicine that doesn't work. And that's what snake oil did. It didn't really work. But it was still firmly believed in for so long. I'm pretty sure that other countries believed in that as well. Speaking of which, an international known cure across the world in the olden times. Say you've got some warts, very yucky, very nasty. Just get some slime from a snail or a slug, and put that into the wart. Oh, isn't that disgusting? If that's not weird enough, the ancient Babylonians, they had a spiritual idea for, well, a lot of things. Anytime there were, for example, sorts of, well, yucky things going on in the body. Let's say that you've got an aching skull, or perhaps you're grinding your teeth a lot. What they said was that it has to do with something with the spirits. Perhaps there's someone who's died and is not happy with you. So what they did was have you sleep next to a skull. Yes, an actual skull. They would put that right next to your bed, and they'd say, be sure to lick and kiss it at least about 7 times or so before you go to bed. Very strange indeed, very peculiar. They actually thought that appeasing the spirits this way would help. Isn't that strange? But of course, there haven't just been lots of failures and weird stuff in the past. There have actually been some genuine, surprising discoveries back then. For example, the ancient Egyptians, they put honey on wounds to help heal them, and that worked. Sticky and delicious, I know, but it definitely worked. All of those sugars and other kind of chemicals did genuinely help with protecting wounds from, well, anything entering the body to infect it. So it was really good for sealing them up. And then you had the Egyptians again with moldy bread on wounds. And back then, they didn't really know that it had anything to do with penicillin. But, of course, in the 20th century, early 20th century. That's when penicillin was discovered and eventually mass-produced. So that's a very interesting discovery for them. They even had people urinate, like, well, women who would urinate in, I think it was flour, because if they were pregnant, then I believe it would be blood in their urine that would appear. And that would be sometimes a precursor to figure out, oh wait, that must mean you're pregnant. It would be some kind of chemical in the urine that, when urinated into flour, it would ferment, and therefore they discovered that a person was pregnant that way. Isn't that fascinating? And then you had the ancient Romans. They thought that, well, they were quite experimental. They took a few pointers from the Greeks, who were very experimental as well. What the Romans did was they had a hospital right near people who lived near swamps, and they thought, God, all these people are getting sick. Why could this be? Let's experiment. Let's build a temple nearby. Let's see if that works. Unfortunately, that didn't work, so they thought, well, it must have something to do with bad smells. Bad smells must be making people sick. So, let's get rid of this swamp. Let's empty it out and get all the yucky water out. And believe it or not, people weren't getting as sick anymore. They were actually onto something. Isn't that clever? They were the people who made the sewers, after all. They did, of course, invent the sewers and, the water canals. I can't remember what they're called. But they did invent those, of course. Of course, it was quite foolish of them to destroy much of ancient Greece, the Greek Empire, trying to take over all of that. And they could have very well, at least taken some of those medical documents and whatnot, but still, they were onto something there. They were very much onto something. Then you had medicinal figures like Galen. I think he was either a Greek or a Roman, I can't remember quite so well, but Galen believed that humans shared similar body structures with pigs and apes. Now, he was onto something with the apes, but pigs, definitely not. There were the pigs, of course. The pigs have half a skull, like two halves of a skull, kind of held together by the blood and sinew and muscle. And people didn't want to argue with that for centuries. They actually thought that was the case until the Renaissance period, about the 1700s or so, when there were certain people who grave robbed dead bodies, which was illegal in that time, to actually check on a human body and skeletons and go, wait a minute, that's not right. Human bodies don't have like half skulls like pigs. How strange. Young go-getters back then were really kind of pushing the limits, you see, when it comes to medicine and the sorts of kind of like, the status quo. The status quo's there to be questioned, after all. So anyway, those are some interesting facts, rather grisly ones, about medicine through the ages. So, how are your stress levels now? Have they been reduced, or maybe they've gone up? I want to know how you're feeling after hearing all these fascinating facts about medicine. What do you have to say then? Really? You don't say. Well, I'm going to make a note of this. Thank you very much. Thank you very much indeed. And of course, hopefully, good old Dr. Cyneric here will be back again to give you more checkups in my regular form, not as a little bird. But at least as a little bird, what I can do is help you go to sleep. So tell you what, close your eyes. There we go. And I shall sing a song for you. Well, I'll whisper a song for you. No, actually, no. I'll whistle. Yes, I'll whistle a song for you, so you can go to sleep, ever so gently. Hope you don't mind the little bristles of my feathers. I like to kind of swing my head around just very gently, kind of, like that when I whistle, you see. I hope this is helping you relax. I hope you have beautiful dreams, a relaxing rest. And just so you know, Dr. Cyneric cares about you very much. You're my star patient, after all, my number one patient.